All right, everybody, welcome. This is the Cult Magazine podcast, and I know in the last episode I said see you all in June of 2025, given our inconsistency of getting this podcast out here. But we have a very esteemed guest that we would like you all to meet and learn from, and we're very grateful that she is here. It is none other than fellow Emerson College grad alum Ivelisse Rodriguez, who is a excellent writer and is the author of the short story collection Love War Stories. And it is it was a finalist for the 2019 Faulkner Award, and I am just really glad that Ivelisse is on. So, oh, and Jake is on the podcast as well.
Yeah, I'm also here.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, just to jump right into it, in the light of, we try to talk about like writers' lives and like how a writer navigates certain aspects of literati or literary culture and how that might affect their own writing. So, Ivelisse, the first question that I have in this list is because you're a Faulkner finalist, and that will always be something like associated with your Wikipedia page, because it's an excellent collection, particularly the short story Summer of Nene. But when you were receiving all
That
this
is a really
news,
good story.
yes. And now when you're navigating that, newfound, maybe not fame, but clout as a writer, does that affect your writing at all? And as a kind of like a dovetail to that, is it freeing or do you feel constricted by kind of like that notoriety?
No, I don't think it affects my writing at all. In fact, it makes me think, it gives me hope that the next book can be published. I've heard a lot of stories where people are having trouble selling their books, which kind of scares me. But it gives me hope that the next book can be published. And I think it also gives me the drive to make the next book even better or distinct from the short story collection. Um, there are writers that I think um, sometimes their follow up books. Kind of sound like they're just trying to like imitate themselves, and I mean this in a negative way. And I want to make sure that I keep telling stories that aren't normally told, and I want to sort of like elevate my writing voice. So no, it doesn't scare me at all. If anything, it gives me comfort. I feel like nobody could take anything away from me now if I died tomorrow. At least I did the thing. I published my book, and then I was a Faulkner finalist. So um, I feel like that's pretty good. And I know definitely I have a bunch of super successful friends, and they have more accolades. But for I think just an everyday writer, I think I've done well enough. And again, if I die tomorrow, it'd be all good. So
So that's like one thing, like in my own like weird head, I sometimes like think like I had the like pleasure of a few years ago of getting nominated for a push cart, and it was really cool, but I I felt like it was kind of a little bit like, I don't know, it just felt weird. Like usually I just kind of felt like I was like in this own bubble of mine when I was like writing, and like a few people would read it and it's like, okay, that's great, and like some people like stumble across it and like, okay, that's great, but like there wasn't any sort of like active like push from like another body or another entity that pushed me forward. And so it's kind of comforting to hear that, because I get a little bit like, because like some of the things I've written about have not necessarily been the most politically correct things about several aspects, and I always kind of go like, oh man, like the minute like I get any degree of clout, people are gonna look, there it is. Look at that. I don't know, but Jake, do you feel any like somewhat similar or any sort of similar paranoia, or am I just delusional?
No, I mean I spoke with a professor of mine, like Neil Perry, like a year ago, and we were talking about like the book publishing process, and it was like kind of, and I was, I was in the midst of querying a novel, and he was like, it's like harder than like getting a first book out, right? And I was like, what? And he was like, getting the second book out, like because like the like expectation by like publishing houses is like they'll, I think like you might get like a better chance or like more of a chance off a first novel, but if you have a first novel that doesn't sell well or like doesn't get awards or anything, like it gets really hard to pitch the next novel. So like I feel like which is like which is like I don't know, at that moment I was like, oh my god, I have so far to go. But yeah, like I do, yeah, I definitely can like understand what you're saying. Like you've kind of like made it past the gate a little bit.
I think it's for me also, it took me such a long time to get the book published that I already have like a good level of like pessimism about what can happen. And so I think I sort of come to things from a different perspective. I feel like I'm a lot more grateful than some of the writers I know about certain things that happen because it took such a long time to happen. So I don't take it for granted. And I also know how poorly things can work out. And I think that's my personality too. Like, I'm not the kind of person that's going to be like, well, let's hope for the best, or it's gonna be all right. It may not be all right. And so I think I just have a really realistic perspective of what can happen. So I think that's why it's comforting for me to be a Penn Faulkner finalist and to get like different accolades for the book because like I appreciate it and I know that things can totally change tomorrow, you know?
Right. That's
Oh, sorry, Jake, were you gonna say something?
No, I was just thinking about our cover artist. His name is Fraser, and he said this thing to me one time that made me laugh. Where he was like, people are always like worried about like their like life's like I don't know, getting ruined. But like I've ruined my life like 3 times. It's like so easy to do. It's just like, but like I don't know. I guess like it's kind of freeing. I guess like if you don't have the dread of like everything going wrong. Like once I feel like it could be a little more freeing to keep writing and keep doing stuff.
That is fair enough. It's like because like outside of like my writing life, some things have gone pretty well for me. And just remember being completely broke and unemployed while at grad school and just getting by during the era of COVID. And then realizing that, oh, you literally have nothing to lose. Like, there's literally, from your own personal standpoint, like you have nothing to lose. Now I feel like there is like something that I could like lose, and that's like a fear, but it's also just kind of like when I put something out there that I believe in it, and some people have like in my life have gone like, I don't know if like you should say that. It's gonna it could, and I'm like, but I believe it. Like that's like I believe it. Like it's not only that I believe in the piece, I believe in what I wrote, particularly if it's nonfiction. And I guess it's like I'm toggled between the I don't care and what may, this is what's gonna happen. But then there's that other part where going like, yeah, but there could also be some material consequences for that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that I mean, I've seen that just this past year with anybody that's like been pro-Palestinian, that there is that in the back of your mind that there are material consequences. And so you're sort of fighting yourself with that about that because in your mind you think one thing, but then the realistic consequences. And are you willing to give those things up because of
Mhm.
what you believe, which in this moment, what we believe like really isn't changing anything. And I think it's, definitely for people that have something to lose, like
Mhm.
it's a it's a bad negotiation because, you know, I'm quick to call somebody else a coward, but then I also realize, well, I'm being cowardly too. And maybe the thing is you just have to make peace with being cowardly. And the thing with like sort of like rhetoric or believing in any sort of idea, it's great like in theory, but then in praxis, um, you realize all the small negotiations you have to make. These things that sort of like chip away at what you thought you believed, etc. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, and that's true in many regards when it comes to, frankly, how a lot of the literary establishment up until kind of this year, they, particularly the National Book Award, they would highlight writers who, in my opinion, wouldn't necessarily speak the true truth to power. They just kind of did it as a window dressing treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And people like enlightened centrists can go like, oh yes, well they make a very compelling argument through their work here. But so except for this year, they got, I think, 3 Palestinian writers were given National Book Awards in 3 different categories. I think for poetry, nonfiction, and children's literature. And I think, or young adult literature. I can't remember which. And to me, like, given how much of the publishing world, except for the likes of someone like Ta-Nehisi Coates, has been very silent on the issue of the Gazan genocide, and it just kind of like I don't know, but like, what do you all think? Does it give you all like a little bit of like hope that like there are some institutions out there that are trying to uplift? Like, because I kind of like was completely off the National Book Award and like the Pulitzer Prize Committee and all these other committees. But do you think that there is some degree of hope now that we've seen at least some sort of symbolic recognition of what's going on?
I don't know. It feels like two steps forward and like five steps back because clearly Penn, received a lot of backlash for its inability to really call something what it was. And in a way, so even though I just did talk about cowardice and how a lot of writers don't speak, there are definitely other writers who are speaking up, and all those people that like withdrew their nominations. Like that was really powerful. And also in my mind, I'm like, oh God, I'm glad I'm not in that position because it's terrible.
Yeah.
So I had a student who won one of the Penn Awards, the Dow Emerging Award, and he withdrew it from consideration. And it was for his first fiction publication, and I'm like, "Oh, this hurts me." And
Yeah.
because I also know what it means to be nominated or to win an award like that. But I think a lot of the cultural institutions that we've relied upon, that we sort of believed in, have really let us down. And I think that the majority have let us down. And so it's nice for the ones that stand up, but I think it's probably going to be, I don't know, another decade before we're on the side of the majority instead of being like a minority in terms of calling a genocide what it is.
Yeah. I mean, it just like like it does seem like any like large art institution that like has a reasonable amount of like influence in America is just like way too tied up in this thing. And it's just like a money thing at this point. Like if you like trace like American influence and money, like it eventually like goes back to the military, and if it eventually goes back to the military, eventually goes back to Israel. Like and so like I don't think I mean anything like Penn Faulkner National Book Award, like if anything has that much influence, like it's gonna have its hands tied. And like I had this, like higher education's like that too. Like Emerson is that as well. Like that's the whole thing right now. We have this like student that's writing a paper about our magazine, and she was like, "Hey, like I'm trying to get out of my like program at George Mason, and I was looking at Emerson because it has a good publishing program, but also I've been like listening to what you guys have been saying about Emerson and like does it suck? And I was like, no, like it doesn't suck. Like the people that like work there, like the staff are like incredible. Like there are like really great writers that like are also really great teachers. It's like this crazy combo of staff that are incredibly like acclaimed, but also like give a shit. And like like really but it's like it's like a higher administration issue, and it's like it bleeds into the faculty as well. Like it's not like to say the faculty at Emerson are completely guiltless, but like it's hard to like navigate those decisions because I'm like, yeah, like if you want to be in publishing, like Emerson's a good place to go. And like in contradiction to everything I've said this year and continue to say is like, yeah, like if you're making that plan, that move, like that you're gonna make connections and allies in that space that aren't that person. It's just kind of the higher administration of it that is tied up with the money, which eventually leads you back to, I don't know, fascism.
I mean, we have people that were colleagues of ours, and peers of ours at Emerson who have, gained some degree of, I don't know, maybe not clout, but definitely professional benefit from their connection to an institution like Emerson and the connections that it provides. But they will talk ad nauseum about, not that of course they can speak up about whatever they want, but they will talk ad nauseum about the fascism and Hitlerian approach of Donald Trump, but they will then go like, Kamala rules. Kamala is Brad. Kamala is the best. And we love her so much. And I'm just like, do you know that she's still the vice president? And she literally is shaking hands with BB right now?
I've seen so much of that, and I'm like, everybody has lost their minds. Like, again, this goes back to people's like willingness to lie to themselves. Again, with the minimization, or even when people would say, "Oh, Kamala's the lesser of two evils," I'm like, evil is the one who's committing the genocide. I'm like, obviously Trump is awful too, but how did she come up the lesser of two evils in that equation? And so again, it's like all of these institutions and all these people you believed in, there's this tiny crack where something ugly has come out. Um, I mean, obviously, it has to do with self preservation, and that's fine. But for me, what's annoyed me the most is people's unwillingness to tell the truth, that nobody will say, yes, Kamala's committing a genocide, but I'm scared for my family, and so that's why I'm going to vote for her. And I'm like, if people were just a little bit more honest, it would be a little bit better, because instead they're minimizing. And I'm like, are you out of your mind?
Right.
Do you actually believe that?
Yeah, it does feel like it's. I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot too. It's like I just feel like it's this like pernicious effect of like everyone having to be like their own rhetorician. How do you say that? One who does rhetoric. Um,
Or a sophist, as one might do.
right, but like, because I feel like this is. I mean, we're in the era in which like you're your own brand and your viewpoints are not just like in conversation with peers. They're like they have to be public. And so I feel like everyone's like brains are fucked up where they can't say like what they actually mean or want, and they have to be like they have to act like politicians. It's like, dude, like just be straight with me. Like what do you want? Like cuz I was in North Carolina and I was like, like I got friends and like family that are like Trump people. And so like and I was just and like to the same degree I was like, what did you want out of this? Like what like no judgment, just tell me like what you're looking for. Like what to your own personal gain, why did you vote for him? And you get the same answers. It's like you just kind of like get like a repeat of policy. It's like we gotta like in the wars. We gotta like. It's like, dude, you don't give a fuck about war. Like, you're broke as fuck. Like, like, what are you talking about? Like, you should care about your taxes. Like, that should be your priority. Like, you like if you said something like that, I would get it. But it's like, I don't know. Like, I feel like the need to have like a unified and clean like public statement has just like ruined anyone's ability to articulate their like political needs, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think only it's part of the reason why I got off Twitter, because I feel like I can't say what I really want to say. And I also think, maybe it's best that we don't know everybody's like deepest, darkest thoughts, because then I'm sort of like, ooh, is that what you think? So then I'm judging all these people, and they're perfectly good people in other respects, but um maybe we just don't need to have so much like public access to what everybody thinks anymore.
Right.
It's very it's very kind of like it's the double-edged sword of that, because there are moments where they're like, "Oh, we don't need to know everything about everyone." And that allowed people like, I don't know if you've read the news recently, but someone like Cormac McCarthy can basically, just by his own reclusion, um be able to be completely away from the public eye, except when he put out a book. But he was also doing some pretty sordid shit when he was a 40 something year old person with like with a teenager. It's just like, did you like
No.
it just
We
came out
we
like
lost Cormac McCarthy. Cormac McCarthy has fallen.
yeah.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, he was had a long-standing relationship with a girl who was around at the very most 15 years old when he was 43 years old and married. And yeah, it was his second wife too, and it was just like she came forward and revealed and kind of made public statements, and she's going to have her bio come out. Weirdly enough, he actually did say like, "Hey, like I'm gonna be gone soon, so you might as well write a book about this. You might as well do something about this, because like it's gonna come out anyway with my archives, so you might as well just capitalize on kind of what I did." And it's just like it was such a weird thing that like we just kind of all, for so many public figures, but particularly this writer who I still hold in esteem to be probably the best American novelist of the 20th century. And I just find it so, and I'm curious what you both think about it. Like, how is kind of like the flip side of like not really knowing everything and kind of being a little bit more willfully ignorant of other people, that allows that sort of ugliness to kind of like not be cracked through, but to seep underneath.
I think it still happens with like people that are public, because there are all these other people in the background like keeping their secrets. Like I'm thinking about like Puff Daddy, like certainly like very public, and then these horrible, horrible things come out about him, and you're sort of like, this person was like shoved in our faces for like 30 years, and we still didn't know. At least the public didn't know, but there are all these other people that like kept a secret. And so, I mean, it seems like whether you're public or not, people are doing terrible things, and it's incumbent upon like a victim to come forward and be believed, and break the story, because obviously there are other times like with the women who accused Cosby of rape. They came forward and nobody believed them, and the accusations didn't gain any traction for a while. So it's like all these things have to happen. You have to come forward, you have to be believed, and then it has to gain traction for it
Mm-hmm.
even to sort of like blow up or make a difference.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like well, interesting on, I guess, in both terms of like cultural climate, where like Matt called me last night and he was like, "Did you hear about Cormac McCarthy?" And I was like I don't even have to like look into this. Like that probably happened. Like like he wrote this happened when and he was where he also kind of like it happened during the period of time, I guess. Then he was writing Suttree, which is basically like a long book about him like deciding to kill himself or not. And well, it's like his like farewell to alcoholism kind of. It's like this like do I want to take part in the world or not? And I was and it's like I mean it's an incredible novel, but now it kind of sucks that he was sleeping with a 16-year-old during it. Um but yeah, it's like it is, it's incredible at like almost daily rate, like to reveal like what type of cultural climate existed like not that long ago, maybe like 10 years ago or like 20 years ago, like where like I don't know, like he probably had friends that just like joked about that. They're probably like, "Oh, dude, Cormac, he's got his like little girl over there." Like that was like, I mean, you go like watch movies from that period of time, people just like talk like that. And so like yeah, like I don't doubt that this happened and then like went under wraps until now, just because like that's how it was. And it is like crazy that like you do have to have this like perfect like little microclimate of notoriety and relevance for like anything to happen in terms of like coming clean as like a victim. Um, yeah, it everyone's a pedophile. Uh, as soon as you make 200 more than $200,000 a year, you start having pedophilic lust. Um,
I don't think
it's
that's
true.
necessarily true.
Matt's disagreeing because he's trying to make more than $200,000 a year.
I'm just trying to make enough money so I can pay off my student loans, and $200,000 seems like that could be the only way I can do that
Yeah, be
within the
careful.
next decade.
Be careful.
It is to me like it's such a like I get why people are shocked, and I'm also like it's unsurprising because like you just got to read some of the stuff that he's written. Like a lot of the stuff he's written, not saying that it's like a reflection of him like as a person, but sometimes if you start writing enough about certain aspects, because that's what Blood Meridian is filled with. It's filled with just heinous things going on. And it's a great depiction of imagination. It's a wonderful and violent, and as Harold Bloom called it, it's a slaughterhouse of a novel. But it also, with given this new light, it kind of just makes it unsurprising that he would be like that, which is unfortunate because there's always this really, like I hold so true to this like idea that like what someone writes fictionally is not necessarily what they believe in real life or have any degree of proclivity toward. It's just imagination. It's not quote unquote real. It's not supposed to be there as taken as a gospel. So it just kind of like it upsets me every single time when I come across a writer who I'm like, that's a great piece of imagination, and that was just so devastating. And then it's revealed that they were doing a shade or an aspect of what was depicted there, and it sucks. It just sucks because it kind of like almost seems like it kind of like deconstructs that what might some people might call a myth.
It's like a loss for the reader or the listener because you love this thing. You have an attachment to it. You have memories attached to it. And now you're forced to look at it in a different way. And it's like, really, there's just so many limited things that we can love in this world, in this life. And now this is taken from us too.
Hundred
They're taking
percent.
everything.
It's taken absolutely everything. A culture eating itself, and or the remnants of whatever culture America ever had. That wasn't just appropriating historically underserved communities and then passing it off as inclusion.
Yeah.
And in light of that, about kind of talk about like, a little bit more
Huge
focused in.
huge segue here.
What a segue. What a segue.
That's a crazy segue. That all right. That okay, Matt. Now, kind of, you're kind of on fire today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad because I'm a little bit hungover. So I feel like I'm popping off on all cylinders here. So
Yeah.
in that light, to focus more, Ivelisse, what do you think the modern publishing industry, particularly in America, gets wrong when it comes to literary fiction? Because you've been exposed to it and you've been in the trenches of it. And I believe you had the City University of New York's press, the feminist press, published love war stories. I'm unfamiliar with like if they're kind of like more with like a more of a hefty or well-backed publishing house, but how has that kind of experience been, and what has it revealed that there might be like deficiencies that can be improved upon?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think I'll focus on Latinx literature because I feel like with Latinx literature, in a sense, like nobody really regards it. Nobody's really sort of like interested in it. Um, with publishing, I feel like there is an ethnicity of the year. So one year or for several years, a long time ago, we saw like an explosion of like Indian or Indian American writers. We saw an explosion of Nigerian or Nigerian American writers. And so you've never seen an explosion of any really Latinx group. Um, well, yeah, I would say for the most part, I don't think you've seen that explosion. And so I think for Latinx writers, we're very excluded. And I think sometimes the Latinx lit that is published isn't held to the same standard as we would other literary fiction in terms of editing. And I think, I mean, this I think is a larger problem with the publishing industry in that editors don't always edit like they used to. And so that's a challenge because you then, as the writer, really have to edit your work. And obviously, you're going to have blind spots, you're not going to see everything. You need that professional to like help you out. And, as of late, there have been some Latinx books that have done really well. Um, but I remember an author saying, like, even the Latinx books that get like these big book club endorsements, a lot of times those books still don't make the New York Times bestseller list. Um, it hasn't been the case for all of them because some of them certainly have. Um, but I really think it's probably, a very anti Latinx immigrant environment that makes our work seem less desirable, not only from the publisher's perspective, but also their reading audience. And so we we have a big issue there, and you would think that the amount of Latinx people, like, we could sort of like cover those losses of like other cultures not being interested in our work, but that doesn't tend to happen. And obviously, Hachette had the big problem. No, it wasn't Hachette, sorry, it was Flatiron, right? They had the big problem with American Dirt, and
Oh yeah.
yeah, and so they did like go like on this buying spree of like Latinx writers like after that. But we see that there'll be these movements that like push back and sort of demand equity. But then after a certain time, these companies will dissolve those movements. Like a lot of companies that are like closing down their like DEI departments. It's sort of like, oh, you did it because of BLM and what have you. But now you realize it's not really profitable or in your best interest, so you don't really care anymore.
So, in terms of, to kind of like follow up on that, in terms of, you think that there is the publishing industry when it comes to Latinx literary fiction. There is this kind of like this check the box, or like this very kind of myopic, like check the box, like demographic, topic, viewpoint, perspective, identity of the writer, even maybe even where that plays into whether a publishing industry or publishing firm will invest in that person and their work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard these stories from other writers that, let's say a publisher has, I think the example I heard was the publisher was publishing something about a quinceañera. And I guess somebody else had that same idea for that year. And they were like, well, we already have one book. So again, it's this idea that it can only be one Latinx person or one person of color. Or this idea could only be used once because, I don't know, they're going to write about it the exact same way, which they're not. And so so I think that again, there's just a lack of desire to learn about certain cultures. Can you repeat the question?
Like the question was more kind of like what like why is there such a lack of desire amongst the publishing industry to um not have a variety of voices within the Latinx literary fiction community? Because you think that it's most likely because of these quotas, these internal quotas they put together that are just kind of myopic and a little bit kind of like laced with privilege?
Yes, and I also think they think our work isn't going to sell, and I think that they think that it's not as important as like hearing from some other group, especially sort of like a new migrants, etc. And you had also asked like if they wanted to hear certain stories. Yeah, absolutely. They want to hear stories about people crossing borders, about people living in the hood. And it goes back to, Percival Everett's book Erasure, where they want that we lives in the ghetto kind of book. And not everybody has that story. Not everybody crosses borders. Not everybody is, you know, poor. Or you have plenty of people that are Mexican American who have been here for generations. And so you don't see a lot of those stories. Instead, you see a repetition of the same story and this reinforcement of it. And, you know, there have been some changes where definitely we've heard from, I would call like the new Latino groups, like Colombian writers like Patricia Engel. We've seen a bit more Central American writers, et cetera, which I think is great. Um, but I think, again, there's that desire for that familiar story. And so, as a scholar of like literature, that's not what I want. I don't want the familiar story. I want to hear the story that I haven't heard before. And so, what happens when you have people that aren't scholars of this, who aren't really interested in this? They're going to go for the story that they know, that they're comfortable with, etc. And they may not recognize those stories that are particularly distinct and are adding to the body of work of Latinx literature.
Yeah. It is kind of funny that I don't know, publishing houses, I guess, will be staffed by people that you would consider, I guess, American left. We'll call it center left, but like people who will at least claim themselves to be like anti-racist, but like their business is like literally just like perpetuating like the same like racial myths like for every single group.
Yeah, like I was reading for an award, and the two other judges wanted to pick this book that was like full of stereotypes. And I was like, in no world am I picking this book. And I mean, I don't think that it should have to take like a scholar of literature to understand that these are stereotypes. And like once I pointed it out, one person was so like reticent about it and still like wanted to pick that book. But I'm like, this book doesn't do anything new at all. And maybe people don't read literature that way. That's the way I read it. And that's probably why I'm like so cranky about books and like don't like as many books as I used to before I had a PhD, where I could read and it's sort of blissful happening. So if you're a reader, do not get a PhD because now I just sort of read with this critical mind and thinking about what is new that's being done here. And I guess most people don't read that way. So, maybe I'm the problem in that case.
I don't think you are. And I think Jake and I would agree on this. Like, yes, like we like when I love Irish literature. My last name, like, it means man of Ireland, translated. So like I love Irish literature. I think it's a great thing. I have some degree of like pride when it comes to like that's my heritage, and I feel like and also I'm pride because it's just a very anti-imperial, anti-colonialist
Mhm.
history that pretty much mastered the language of its masters and pushed the language forward in expressions that some people didn't know possible. But at the end of the day, there's still this prevailing stereotype throughout, like, even modern Irish literature, of just drunken fools. And, like,
Mhm.
it just, like, I'm not saying some of that isn't funny. Like, some of it can be pretty funny, and some of it is true because of it. Like, I'm not going to say that stereotype doesn't exist because there isn't a degree of truth to it, but it also shows that like you got to do something different with it. You got to skin the cat a different way. And like if you're going to subvert the stereotype, go into the stereotype, lean against it, but show like an aspect of maybe why it's positive, like just some degree of like doing something like that will at least expand people's minds. And I always like books that do that in a way that like will sometimes lean really deep into a stereotype, but they show a different aspect of it. Even though he's relatively problematic, but I think he's a great writer. Is another Latinx writer, Juno Diaz. I think that he leans into the machismo of the Dominican community in such a powerful way, but also shows its fragility through that and how there is something that to kind of get with the motif, there's a crack that comes through that shows that there's actual, true, deep humanity involved with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And his book has sort of been reread now as what you're talking about with Cormac McCarthy as, oh no, this is true, etc. But I mean, I love the book Drown. I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
phenomenal collection. I mean, I've read it over the years and it's still like stunning to me. And, Juno helped me a lot. There was a lot of
Really?
discourse of like, he, uh, you know, uh, didn't allow certain women's careers to grow or what have you. But he helped me out enormously. He like published my first two stories in the Boston Review. And so, I'm a woman he helped. I know many other women he helped. And yeah.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I've met Juno Diaz once before. I don't think I've said this on the podcast, but I've said it to Jake a bunch of times, so he's probably going like, "Oh, this fucking story again." But I was a sophomore at Providence College, and I was asked by my fiction professor, because I was finally taking writing seriously. I had started loving it, and actually wanted to do something with it, and I gave my first story, got my first workshop, and the professor was actually Alison Esbach, who's actually gotten a little bit of a clout recently. She wrote this book called The Wedding People, and she was on the Today Show back in August or something. It was like wild. I was like, wait, I was in her workshop when I was a sophomore. She asked me to come to this pre-reading meeting with a lot of professors of Providence College and a few select students that were invited. And I was so nervous because I'm like, this guy won the Pulitzer. Like I had just read Drown, and just very similar to you, it was absolutely wonderful. I like really expanded my mind in so many different ways. Love the collection, and I was so nervous, but usually when I get nervous, I can get a little bit cagey, and he kind of like was going into these platitudes where it was like, you have to figure out why you want to write. And I'm like thinking to myself, that's good advice, but he's not telling me why he does. And I then said, hey man, like so you tell all these people, like, why do you write? Like, you got a Pulitzer, like you obviously have like a reason why. Like, you got something, like you hit a nerve somewhere, like why do you do it? And he's like, well, why do you write it? And me, being the arrogant loser I was as a 20-year-old, was going, because I think I have a story to tell. And he was like, young man, we all know that's bullshit. And I was like, yes, but I answered the question.
That's awesome.
And we talked afterwards, and he was just like, hey man, like, just, just keep searching. Like, you seem like you got something. Like, just keep searching. You seem like you have an idea of what you want to do. You just haven't formed it yet because, like, you're 20.
I did want to circle back to something that Ivelisse was saying about,
Sure.
I guess, like the anticipation of stereotype within writing, or within like writing from like a minority perspective. And I was thinking of like a story about like Nene, which I read yesterday, which was pretty sick. And I guess a cool part about the story is like how much like expectation is subverted for like how the characters from this, like, you land into the setting and you're like, you have a couple expectations, especially as like a white guy. You're like, okay, I think I know what's gonna happen here. To the point where like I didn't even realize it was like a gay story until like halfway through. I was like, hold on, wait a second, that was a guy doing that. No, but and I there's a question in here somewhere. um, but I guess like in anyone's writing, I think like we're all thinking about some like imagined audience, perhaps of like one or of many, and I guess great writing is that which is perceptive of what an audience is going to expect and is like tactful at subverting it and making something new and original feeling. And but I do think that is like a interesting question when like one like race gets involved, right? Like when you're writing from a minority perspective, like you're not just like talking about like plot expectations, you're talking about like expectations racially. And so I don't know, like how when you are writing like that, is that, like at the forefront of your mind, is like, are you like subverting these expectations? Are you like really like kind of having to like sit with them at every single turn?
I do sit with them. Not always at every single turn, but they definitely come up when I'm analyzing my own work. And so, for example, with the story Holyoke, Mass. And ethnography, that's where I grew up. And I was worried. I'm like, does this sound like this cliche story of what happens in impoverished communities and stuff? And I that is the one that I was sort of most concerned about. But then I thought, well, in this collection, you see a variety of Puerto Rican people at different levels in life. So it's not like I wrote just one book that focuses on one idea or one stereotype, etc. Instead, reading the collection, you're going to meet a variety of Puerto Rican people at different points in their lives. And so to me, I could handle that. And so um, it's that stereotypical portrayal that concerns me. And even though I feel like Holyoke Mass and ethnography, even the story, the way it's constructed, I think it's constructed in well, I don't want to talk about my work in that way, but I guess in a really neat way, right? Like it's set up as an ethnography. We get to hear about the other immigrant communities that were in Holyoke before the Puerto Ricans came. We get to like think about and connect this to the story itself. Is that by the time the Puerto Ricans came to Holyoke, like I think I said all the things were gone, like all the gold, all the streets paved with gold. I forgot what I said. But and the Puerto Ricans are blamed for that. And I think that again, um having layers like that in a story makes it more than what you might think it is at the beginning. But I also think that that is what any writer should do. But honestly, not every writer does that, right? I'm really thinking, what is the point of writing if you're not going to write something new and if you're not trying to create art? And obviously, there are other books that are not meant to be art, and that's fine. But for literary fiction, I just don't see the point. And so I see that other people can sort of like finish books quickly, etc. Um, and sometimes I don't think they're necessarily interested in art. I think they're interested in this little pocket or this, or like finishing a book, completing a book, and putting it out there. But with art making, I think you're like thinking about it through multiple levels. And one of the things I tell my students is that when you're writing, you're always working at this like conscious and subconscious level. And I just had them do an analysis. We're doing like the second rounds of workshop in my fiction workshop. And one of the students chose the analysis style workshop. And so the students had to analyze each scene. And once we were done, he was like, "Oh, you guys made me sound a lot smarter than I am." And I was like, "No, like one of the things that I do when I'm writing something, I do a literary analysis of it afterwards to see what it's saying." And I told the student, and this is what I did too in workshop, is like you take credit for all of it, even the things that you weren't aware of. But at some point, you have to meet the text with an awareness. You have to like think about it critically to see what it's doing, to see in a way that it could be read. And also, I think ultimately how you think the story is working. So a lot of my undergrads will say, "Oh, I want to leave the ending up to interpretation," and I'm like, "No, um, people are going to interpret your work in ways that you never imagined." But I think you, as a writer, need to have an understanding of the story you created or the story you're trying to tell, even if it becomes and it will become other things to somebody else.
And in that light, to then provide another killer segue,
Yeah, nice.
um, in terms of literary interpretation, you said about 2 years ago in a recorded interview with, I believe it was called the Literary Freedom Project. There was it was like a Zoom thing, and you said that one of the major, I don't know, guiding lights of the work, or one of the major things that you wanted to get across in this book is how love is detrimental to women. And it was, and I when I heard it like that, I was, I'm a dude, like I'm like this white dude, and I didn't necessarily get that. I understood there were like, like these bastardizations and these malinterpretations or malintended visions or versions of love depicted throughout this amazing collection, but I never thought like, oh, like came with the full conclusion of like, oh, love just sucks for the ladies. It just stinks. So my question involved with that is like, a little bit afterwards, like, do you still believe that? And like, and maybe kind of like shed a little light on like why.
Sure. No, I absolutely believe that. And first, I think heterosexual women, women are trained to be heterosexual, right? Until you decide that you're not, or you realize you're not heterosexual. But nonetheless, before you get to that point, you're getting all these messages of what it's like to be a woman, which is, you're supposed to grow up and, um, get married, have children, etc. And then we have all these rom-coms where like people can be awful to each other, and but still the awful man wins because he's hotter or whatever. And this is kind of weird, but I love the Vampire Diaries and I don't know if you watched it, but, the main character, Elena, ends up with Damien, who was awful. He like killed her brother. He did all these things. So, and online, the teenagers and maybe the old women like me sneaking in, they're all like Team Damon or Team Stefan. And at my old age, I'm like Team Stefan because he was the nice one. But I think we're indoctrinated to sort of think about like lust and desire in a way that is fraught with fighting. And I think that, and I've said this in other places too, which is I think that heterosexuality is a big issue in terms of the way that it's constructed, um, where it's women are always wanting, needing, supplicating men, and men are always sort of like running away. And if you construct this relationship that's supposed to be romantic in that way, um, these things, I don't even know how it's supposed to work. And the, fact of the matter is that I would say maybe like 25% of relationships work, right? I think, people get divorced, people hate each other. Um, and like I had a dog, and I'm like, my dog would do the same thing every day, and every day was amusing, right? If some man did that, I would hate him because I'm like, that is not funny again. But my dog was adorable every day. So I think women, but back to women in love and it being detrimental to them, I think it puts women in these really, a position of like desperation that you must get a man. And if you're doing anything from a desperate position, terrible things are going to happen, because what happens is that your boundaries get trespassed all the time, because what you're focusing on is the goal of getting that man. And so then over time you start doing all these things that you may not have ever thought you would do. I mean, as a young woman growing up, and having friends, other female friends, I mean, if you took out of context all the crap that we took from men, it is unbelievable, because it's like you would never accept that from like a friend. But when it comes to these romantic relationships, your boundaries are so stretched out, and you allow all these terrible things to happen to you. You allow yourself to sort of be measured by whether or not you have a man or not, or all those things. And so, again, it creates that desperation. um and I think it leads to all this violence against women. Even if it's not physical violence, it's all these other types of violence. And um men do it, and then women also reinforce it like in the culture. So for example, I remember one of my sorority sisters, mother, when I was getting a PhD, she's like, "Oh, but how's your love life?" I'm like, "Ma'am, I'm getting a PhD, like that's a little bit more important." I mean, even my mother, I remember one time she was telling somebody, she was like, "Oh, she can't cook and she can't clean." I'm like, no, but I'm getting a PhD. And so it's a lack of respect for all those things. And this is totally random, but again, if you ever watch like women on death row or like these women in jail stories, a lot of them will start with, I had a boyfriend and he made me do this. And so yeah, so
Yeah.
that's what I think.
Anything to add on that one, Jake?
Men ain't shit. No, I think it's all really like, yeah. The boundary point specifically is like, that is kind of like the nature of like love is, and it is the thing that you have to navigate, is that you do stop doing everything that you typically do on your own and allow something, like you just kind of allow someone to have a pass. And I don't know, you have to be pretty like scrutinous with who you give that pass to, because if you just give it out to anyone, like you can, yeah, like can fuck your life up. Um, well said.
Yeah, I mean, I really I really do agree with that, and it's kind of like there's an added dimension, or there's like this embedded dimension that women have and men don't. Like it's like most of the time the man will in a male context, I guess, with what you're saying, to maybe put like a positive spin on it, there is this breaking down of borders, emotional
Yeah.
borders that a man has to relinquish in order to be romantically vulnerable with this partner, in order for it to have at least a chance of being a healthy relationship. And I feel like that is more of an emotional and physical, not a physical, or and maybe not so much a mental thing to do. And women are like, oh, not only do I have to do that from an emotional standpoint, I also, just by my physical nature is also going to be at risk for being this vulnerable, which allows it to be more scrutinous. And I think that what you said about kind of like there's constantly this fighting vibe that comes with this the nature of heterosexual love. I think that's a really interesting point, because I think that very much so women and men do reinforce this maybe not so much machismo, but this constant struggle or triumph of the will that a man needs to be almost to a point where they are like this ravenous animal that will destroy anything that gets in the way of their romantic partner. But then what happens when that energy goes to not the external forces that would threaten a relationship, or the powers that be that would threaten the dynamic of a relationship or a romance? That becomes a very dangerous cocktail.
Mhm.
And oh, go ahead, Jake.
Oh no, that's, yeah.
Oh, okay. Again, we cut all this stuff in post, so we're gonna look like like me and Jake will sound super super smart when we cut this out. And then there are other things that Jake leaves in where I'm like, oh, Jake, can you cut that out? And he just leaves it in because he
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah, I'm on it.
Like, yeah, yeah, I'm definitely on it. I'm like, Jake, I didn't want people to know that I said that. And he's like, well, yeah.
Well, here's the thing. It's like him and Fraser used to do this thing all the time, where we would get on the podcast when we first started doing this thing, and they would just say whatever they wanted, and they'd be like, Jake will cut it out at the end. And I was like, fuck that. Like, I have to, like, like, why do I got to do this? Like, stay, like, if you get on the pod, just assume what you say is going to go onto the pod. Like, I'm not doing this anymore.
Which is
Yeah, that's my assumption. So I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I will
Yeah.
only say so much.
Yeah.
fair enough, fair enough. But now kind of like to tail it off at the end, to talk more about books in general, and kind of books that help shape you, and you would suggest. Given this time of accelerated cultural and societal stratification, given the fact that we have elected yet again President Trump, We have a lot of issues and a lot of potential of things that can become incredibly difficult and rough, particularly for historically underserved and marginalized communities. And I wanted to ask you, Ivelisse, are there books out there that during times like this, because it's it's very important to kind of like go to the books that kind of like reinforce your gospel beliefs, or maybe are there new books that you have that you would like to discover, so that more people can be exposed to new ideas and new contexts, in a time where they can be a little bit where it's difficult to come across those prevailing ideas because the culture is not sustaining them.
Yeah, I mean, I think an old book, and I was rereading it again. It's The Wretched of the Earth by Franz Fanon. And it's based on, the novel I'm writing now, but also just realize these books are gonna get you really angry. But also you're gonna see how the world sort of keeps going back to all those places that we said never again, or to those points in time that we said never again. And I read, I think it was last year, the book The Shadow King by Maza Mengesti, and it was about how Italy tried to conquer Ethiopia. And to me, it was mind blowing. First, I think books like that, um, where the history is not readily known to the majority of the world, is really eye opening. And then you can also always make the connection how this continues to happen, and look at all the pockets in the world where we have the same story. And so, with the whole Palestine issue, um, I'm really focused on it because I think because I'm Puerto Rican. And so, as the oldest colony, being from the oldest colony in the world, I understand, or at least theoretically, since I grew up in the continental US, this idea of people taking your land, and that encroachment and what is lost through there. Um, I read another book recently. I think it's The Storm We Made by Vanessa Chan, I think. But it was about how the I think Japanese had overthrown the British in Malaysia, and then the book ended with I think the British coming back because there was this sentiment that the Japanese were going to be kinder to the Malaysians, but that wasn't the case. And um I mean, this is not helpful in certain terms where you see the reiteration of this story of one group of people doing terrible things to another group of people. But again, since I'm interested in colonialism, it also helps me to understand like how these things happen. What power do you need for it to happen? And also, like what happens to the colonized people? How do they end up in that position? And so there's a line in my novel that I'm working on, and it says something about people coming from ships are always coming to take, and so I think we need to sort of recognize those things. And also I think it also builds like this kinship among all these people across the world that are colonized, and we may not have known that. So I also started reading a book called How to Hide an Empire. So it's about the US empire, and it was like mind blowing. So again, I'm
My
really
brother read that book. He loved it.
oh yeah, I'm just like, what? They did what? It's crazy. And so I love books that offer history that we weren't like aware of. Um and again, it builds this kinship, and it also I think offers like a manual for how these things happen.
I love that. And I guess now that we're an hour and 9 minutes, and I think I'll ask my last question, and it'll be like a three-part quick hitter for each of us. Um, the people at the Life on Books podcast, if you're listening to this, I'm taking this question from you, but they did an entire podcast about books that radicalized them from a bevy of different circumstances and ideas, and they just did an hour-long podcast. So I just would think that, like, each of you, and myself included, what book and in what sense radicalized you or radically changed your viewpoint on the world, where you had to either write differently, think differently, or, operate differently in the, outside the literary realm?
For me, so again, I think it's Right Under the Earth, and I read it in college, and then I started rereading it again for the novel that I'm working on, and there was this whole section on dance and how dance is a way to be revolutionary, which connects to part of my novel that is focused on bomba dancing. And so, I saw that, I was like, oh my God, me and Franz Fanon agree, um, but again, it's books like those that really sort of lay bare um, the things that people do, and the things that governments do to people. So, yeah, those are the kinds of books that radicalize me, because to me, it's also like you can never get away from it. You keep seeing the repetition of this, like throughout, decades and decades and decades. And so any book like that is going to radicalize me and just get me mad. So,
Mad is often good.
We're all answering it.
Yes, yes. I will go.
Uh,
I will go last.
you're going last. Okay. Um, I don't know. I think I like. Uh, I guess like Libra was pretty huge by DeLillo. Um, I think the well, and like Faulkner has been massive for me, and I think like the gradual acceptance of, um, I guess the United States being built on I don't know, being built in a vicious way on poisoned land, and that like the further you look into it, the worse it gets. Um, was like a realization that has been developed uh, through a lot of things for me, and it's hard to point at like one single book, but they all do seem to be guiding me in the same direction. Is like the stuff that I want to read is the like, and we did an episode about like popular literary fiction a while ago, and how like once you kind of like make that like recognition in your mind that okay, like there are only a few people out there that like are going to see the world the way that I'm seeing it now, and if they aren't writing that way, like I just don't really have the time for it. Like if you can't like accept that like this thing was built bad and the only way to like reverse course is to like truly do so, is like you have to like break this thing down and do something different, and that like this it's if you look deep into the heart of America, like it is black. It's not good, especially if you have ancestors that look like mine. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, like in terms of like the like psychoanalysis or like hauntology of myself and my ancestors, like Faulkner was pretty huge to like reckon with being a southerner and reckon with being like more or less like cursed to be on the planet if as soon as you accept like as soon as like if you're I guess from that position of power and you accept that like I want to do some good in the world, you're like, all right, well like your body is made out of bad. Um, and then I guess like in terms of like institutional um, rot, like Pynchon and DeLillo and have been pretty massive, and also fucking Michael Judge, dude. Like if no, I like he's podcast king. And the works of Michael Judge have like legitimately influenced my life. Like specifically, like no one was talking about JFK like Michael Judge was talking about it back then. Besides like him and that dude that wrote JFK and the Unspeakable. And I don't know. I feel like Michael Judge has been like kind of a glowing light for me for a long time.
He's a great writer, and he's a fantastic podcaster. His impressions, he does impressions of William S. Burroughs, Donald Trump, and Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, and they are so spot on. It's absurd, and he's just an incredibly smart guy. And yeah, if you're listening to this, Judge, you're a real one, and we have been inspired and radicalized by you. Um, on my end, I think that a book that really kind of radicalized me was something relatively recent, about like 7 years ago, where about 6 years ago, when Jake introduced me to Robert Coover. I love his work. It's the first time where I felt like my brain was on all cylinders, getting what he was writing, because like it just felt so clear and so unique and so cool. Where I said, "Oh my god, like he's writing the way that I think. It's beautiful." And it just made me like feel at a kinship. So when he died this year, I was just devastated. And particularly the book that kind of like, in a very funny but also very cynical and sardonic way, that really kind of blew my mind, was The Cat in the Hat for President, where the Cat in the Hat is running for the presidency of the United States, and both parties start adopting his policies, but he's actually just like this absurdist fool that points out how both political parties are awful, and then both political parties are like, yeah, we should really get in on this whole cat in the hat thing. And it's like the institutions, but the thing is, like, they try to like manipulate the cat in the hat into doing something. But if you know the character, he's an agent of chaos. That's all he is. He has no other purpose to serve other than for your stimulating enjoyment, and for you to clean up the mess if he doesn't clean it up himself. And that, like, really kind of like reading that and then hearing him read it at, I believe it was Washington University at St. Louis. There's a video of it. I just kind of like read it and listened to it in 2018, and just said, I've laughed, and it was so wonderful, and it's just so, and it just kind of made me go like, yeah, all of this is true. Like it could not be more true, in my opinion. And the other thing that really kind of like was huge for me was someone like Thomas Pynchon, um, just from the particularly his novel V and The Crying of Lot 49, of just kind of understanding that his work, unfortunately, has, and his persona has been bastardized into the QAnon vibe in such a crazy way, and but in such an anti-intellectual light. And that really kind of like shows like the danger of like showing a culture that has been desiccated, and what is left but just the rot of like some moldy toys to work with. And I think that he's really been huge with me. And the third one is probably Zadie Smith. I think that from a writing perspective, she just kind of like showed me that you can establish this aura of explaining the nuts and bolts of a story while telling the story, yet you are so enjoying the fact that it's there, and she's showing you how the sausage is getting made, but it doesn't feel like it's this like intellectual like pretension. It's very accessible for everybody to get through. And like the only person who was comparable to that, who was able to kind of do that without showing the nuts and bolts of the story, was like a proletariat novelist like John Steinbeck. And that just like her just kind of like made me show like what the possibilities were for for a writer. But yeah, but thank you for all for both of you for entertaining that question. And I think that that's I think we're good. How do we all feel?
Yeah, feels like a good pod.
I think it was. And we'll just use the last moment or so for Ivelisse. You can have whatever plug, whatever thing you want to push. Anybody you want to shout out. The floor is now yours.
Um, well, I would like to give some recommendations for Latinx books that people might enjoy. So I read recently Say Hello to My Little Friend by Janine Capocusette, which I thought was amazing. If you read the description of it, it sounds really absurdist. Um, but somehow she pulls this off. It's emotional and really funny. Janine is very funny. I love the book Sabrina and Karina by Kali Fajardo Einstein. It's a beautiful collection, which probably a lot of people have already read, but it's a stunning collection to me. And then I love Melissa Rivero's The Affairs of the Falcons. Um, it's about an undocumented family, and I could just feel the stress of it, of what it means to be undocumented. And it just had me on edge the whole time reading it because, yeah, you must be in a position where you're always vigilant and worried about what's going to happen. It's like you're in a perpetual state of vulnerability. So that book really shook me for that.
All right. Well, thank you. Go ahead, Jake.
No, that's it. You're good.
We'll cut that. We'll cut that part out.
Yeah.
Oh, will Jake actually do that?
I have the
Yeah, well,
login
yeah,
for the
we'll cut.
software,
Yeah, see,
so
now you hear it, right? We'll cut that out. Like, who's cutting it? I'm
I will
cutting
cut.
it.
Fine. You know what I'll do? You know what I'll do? I'll
Matt's
cut it
never
out.
cut
But
a
I won't
thing in his
cut this
life.
exchange out.
Yeah. No, let the people
I
know. The people know.
People know I will cut this out. I
Yeah,
will cut this out. Just not
me
this part
too.
though. Anyway, thank you so much, Ivelisse. Buy the short story collection, Love War Stories, from the Cine University of New York's Feminist Press. Read all of her recommendations. Check her out online. She is on Blue Sky. And oh, you're not on Blue Sky.
No, no, I'm
We'll
just
cut
on
that out.
Instagram now.
Oh, she's on Instagram. We'll cut out. She's not on Blue Sky. Clarification. All right.
Yes.
All right, everybody. Well, I'm going to hit the record off and say signing off and ceasefire now.